My name is Allison Mercer. I'm 40 years old. At 8:46 on a Saturday night inside the private dining room of Razelle in Charleston, South Carolina, my mother-in-law lifted a black leather check presenter from the waiter's hand, opened it with one manicured finger, smiled across a table of 22 guests, and dropped a $150,000 dinner bill into my lap. The room smelled like truffle butter, champagne, and old money, pretending it had never bounced a check. My husband sat beside me, staring at his plate. His mother, Vivienne Mercer, wore a cream silk suit, diamond earrings, and the satisfied expression of a woman who believed humiliation was just etiquette with better lighting. She said, "Since Allison loves pretending she belongs in sophisticated rooms now, perhaps she can pay for one." My sister-in-law laughed first. I counted. 1. Then Vivienne leaned back in her chair and added, "Don't worry, sweetheart. I'm sure your little catering hobby prepared you for restaurant math." The bill rested on my lap, heavy as a dare. 22 people watched me. My father-in-law looked away. My husband Graham whispered, "Just let her have this, please." I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just picked up the bill, folded it once, and placed it neatly beside my water glass. Then our waiter, Mateo, stepped forward, lowered his voice with perfect professionalism, and said, "Mrs. Mercer, would you like me to transfer this to the owner's account as usual?" The room went silent. Vivienne blinked. Once. Twice. Then Mateo turned slightly toward her and added, "For clarity, ma'am, I'm referring to Mrs. Allison Mercer. She owns La Razelle." Vivienne's smile did not fall all at once. It cracked slowly. What she didn't know was that 6 months earlier, through a holding company she had laughed at during Easter brunch, I had purchased 70% of the restaurant, where she had just tried to make me look poor. What she didn't know was that her extravagant dinner, her imported champagne, her private room, her floral arrangements, her custom menu, and the rare wine pairings she ordered under my husband's family name had all been approved by my office. What she didn't know was that the restaurant staff had been instructed not to embarrass her unless she tried to embarrass me first. And Vivienne Mercer had never been able to resist an audience. This is that story. Before I tell you how my mother-in-law ended up smirking over a bill at a restaurant I owned, I want to ask you something. Wherever you are watching or listening from right now, what part of the world are you in and what time is it there? Put it in the comments, because stories like this have a way of finding people who have been underestimated at their own tables. And if you connect with stories about women who were dismissed, mocked, treated like outsiders, and still built something powerful in silence, like this video and subscribe. Some comebacks are not loud. Some arrive in a pressed white dinner jacket, holding the truth on a silver tray. I grew up in Savannah, Georgia, in a yellow house with peeling porch paint, 2 magnolia trees in the yard, and a kitchen that always smelled like something was about to become comfort. My mother, Elaine Porter, worked as a bookkeeper for a plumbing company. My father, Russell Porter, drove a delivery truck for a restaurant supplier and came home with stories about chefs who yelled, servers who moved like dancers, and walk-in freezers cold enough to make your teeth ache. We were not poor in the dramatic way people write about. We were careful. There is a difference. Careful means my mother paid the electric bill on the 15th because she knew the grace period ended on the 17th. Careful means we bought chicken thighs instead of breasts. Careful means my father repaired the same lawnmower 3 summers in a row because buying a new one would have meant delaying the dentist. But our table was never empty. My mother made skillet cornbread, tomato gravy, shrimp and rice when my father got a good discount, and lemon pound cake every birthday because she believed boxed cake mix was a surrender of imagination. I learned to cook standing on a step stool beside her, measuring flour with serious concentration, while she taught me that feeding people was not the same as serving them. "Serving is what you do," she said once, tapping my wrist lightly with a wooden spoon. "Feeding is what you mean." I carried that sentence into every room that later tried to make me feel small. I started working in restaurants at 15. First as a hostess at a seafood place near River Street, where tourists asked whether everything was fresh and then ordered fried shrimp from a frozen bag. At 17, I worked prep in a bakery. At 19, I was waiting tables at a hotel restaurant while taking business classes at a community college. I learned how kitchens breathe. I learned who really runs a dining room. I learned that the person carrying your plate may understand more about money, timing, pressure, and human behavior than the person at the head of the table. By 25, I had opened a small catering company called Porter Table. It began with office lunches and bridal showers, nothing glamorous, turkey wraps, pimento cheese biscuits, fruit trays, then corporate events, then private dinners, then weddings where mothers of the bride cried over seating charts, and fathers asked why flowers cost more than generators. I built slowly. I saved receipts. I paid vendors on time. I learned margins the way some people learn prayer. At 29, I moved to Charleston because a hotel group offered me a contract to manage events for 3 historic properties. I rented a 1-bedroom apartment above a locksmith on Queen Street and worked until my feet throbbed. I bought 2 black dresses I could rotate for client meetings and wore the same pearl studs every day because they made me look more polished than my bank account felt. That was where I met Graham Mercer. Graham was 33 then, an architect with a preservation firm that restored old houses for people who called themselves custodians of history while installing wine elevators. He had sandy brown hair, a careful smile, and the kind of quiet that made me think he was thoughtful rather than trained not to disagree. We met during a fundraising dinner at the Ainsley House Museum on October 19, 2016. I was managing the catering team. He was on the event committee because the Mercers had donated money to restore the garden wall. At 9:12, a guest knocked over a tray of crab canapés near the library entrance. I bent to help the server collect broken porcelain while guests stepped around us, as if gravity were our fault. Graham crouched beside me and said, "Tell me what to do." That was all. Not, "Are you okay?" Not, "Someone should clean this." Tell me what to do. I handed him a stack of napkins. He helped quietly for 6 minutes. Later he found me near the service corridor and said, "You saved that dinner." I laughed. "I saved the carpet." He smiled. "In Charleston, that may be more important." I liked him. He did not lead with his last name. I learned it 2 weeks later when he invited me to coffee, and the barista said, "Good morning, Mr. Mercer," with the subtle reverence people reserve for money that has been around long enough to grow a genealogy. The Mercers were an old Charleston family, not the richest, not anymore, but old enough to make newer money nervous. Their name appeared on plaques, garden club rosters, museum donor walls, and one private school library wing. Graham's father, Edward Mercer, had inherited a shipping-adjacent business that had mostly become real estate holdings. His mother, Vivienne, served on charity boards, wore cream in all seasons, and said things like, quote, "One doesn't discuss cost while discussing cost with surgical precision." Graham told me early that his mother could be particular. That was the word he used, particular. I should have paid attention to how gently men describe women they expect you to endure. I met Vivienne for the first time on January 8, 2017, at brunch at the Mercer House on South Battery. The house was pale blue, with white columns, iron balconies, and a garden wall covered in jasmine. I wore a navy dress and carried a box of pastries from a bakery I loved. I remember holding the box in both hands like an offering. Vivienne opened the door herself. She looked me up and down, not rudely enough to accuse, but slowly enough to record. "Allison," she said. "How nice. Graham told us you work in food." "Not catering, not events, food," I smiled. "I own a catering and event company." "How industrious." That was the first cut. Small, clean, designed to be deniable. At the table, she asked where I went to school. When I said I had started at community college and later completed my business degree through a state university program, she tilted her head. "How practical." Graham looked at his plate. His sister Charlotte, who was 36 and had never held a job longer than her father's patients, said, "Honestly, I envy people who can be so hands-on. I can barely organize flowers without having to lie down." Vivienne smiled at her. "That is because you were raised with taste, darling, not necessity." They laughed. I counted 1. Graham squeezed my knee under the table. At the time, I mistook that for support. Now I understand it was a request. "Please absorb this quietly." After brunch, as we were leaving, Vivienne touched my arm and said, "I hope you understand, Allison. Graham's world can be rather demanding." Some women find it difficult if they are used to a more casual environment. I looked at her hand on my sleeve, then at her face. I'm comfortable in demanding environments. She smiled. I'm sure you are. That smile became familiar over the next 6 years. Vivienne did not shout. She did not curse. She did not make scenes where strangers could judge her. She weaponized refinement. She corrected napkin placement, pronunciation, guest lists, hem lengths, menu choices, flour varieties, and the temperature of soup. She called it guidance. Graham called it just mom. I called it by its real name, only in private. Contempt. The first major incident happened at our engagement dinner. Graham proposed on May 3, 2018, in the garden behind the Ainsley House Museum, near the wall he had helped restore. The ring was an emerald-cut diamond that had belonged to his grandmother. He said, "I know my family can be a lot, but you make me feel like myself." That sentence should have worried me. I was too busy being loved. Vivienne hosted the engagement dinner at her house 3 weeks later. 20 guests, silver candlesticks, white orchids, place cards hand-lettered in navy ink. She had hired another catering company, not mine. When I noticed the servers setting down past hors d'oeuvre, I recognized the logo on the chef's jacket. It belonged to a competitor who had underbid me on 3 corporate events and once served cold risotto at a museum luncheon. Vivienne saw me notice. She said, softly, "I thought you deserved to relax tonight. Besides, one doesn't ask family to work." Charlotte added, "Unless the food is the family." She laughed. I counted 1. At dinner, Vivienne gave a toast. She said, "Marriage is not merely about love. It is about entering a family, understanding its customs, and knowing when to preserve what came before you." Everyone lifted glasses. I smiled because cameras were pointed at us. Later, in the kitchen, I found one of the hired servers crying because the chef had blamed her for a missing tray count. I spent 15 minutes helping her reconstruct the service list while my own engagement dinner continued in the next room. Graham found me. "There you are," he said. I looked up. "She's being blamed for something that isn't her fault." He lowered his voice. "Can you not get involved tonight?" I stared at him. He added, "My mother went to a lot of trouble." I went back to the dining room, not because he was right, because I was still learning how expensive it is to be the only person in a room willing to name the problem. We married on April 6, 2019, at a historic chapel in Charleston with a reception in a restored warehouse overlooking the harbor. I paid for half the wedding myself because I refused to let Vivienne purchase control outright. She still tried. She told me blush roses were overexposed. She told me my mother's dress was a brave color. She told the planner that my signature cocktail sounded a little county fair. At the final tasting, when I suggested the shrimp and grits needed more acid, Vivienne smiled at the chef and said, "Forgive Allison. She thinks like a kitchen, not a guest." The chef, a woman named Maribel Cruz, looked at me. Then she added lemon zest to the next spoonful. It was better. Vivienne did not forgive that. On the wedding day, my mother held my hands in the bridal suite and said, "You know you don't have to earn your place with those people." I said, "I know." But I didn't. Not yet. For the first few years of marriage, I tried to make peace without making myself disappear. That is a harder task than people admit. I invited Vivienne to dinner. I sent flowers on her birthday. I included her in holiday planning. I gave her credit for things I did not need her credit for. She responded by treating every kindness like a negotiation she had won. When Graham and I hosted Thanksgiving in 2020, Vivienne arrived with a backup turkey in the trunk of Edward's car. "I wasn't sure how confident you were with larger birds," she said. "I had cooked for weddings with 400 guests." Graham laughed awkwardly. "Mom, Allison's got it." Vivienne said, "Of course, I just feel better prepared." She asked me where to put the backup turkey 3 times in front of guests. The 4th time I said, "In your car, unless it needs a plate." The room went quiet. Vivienne's eyes cooled. Graham pulled me aside 15 minutes later. "Did you have to embarrass her?" I looked at him. "She brought a second turkey to my house." "She was trying to help." "No, she was trying to make sure everyone knew she didn't trust me." He sighed. That was Graham's family inheritance, the sigh, soft, tired. disappointed in the person requiring courage from him. Can you just let things go sometimes? I did, for too long. By 2022, Porter Table had become more than catering. I had expanded into hospitality consulting, private event strategy, and distressed restaurant turnarounds. The pandemic had broken many good restaurants and exposed many bad leases. I understood food, labor, vendors, cash flow, and the emotional weather of dining rooms. Investors began calling me when restaurants had beautiful rooms and ugly balance sheets. That was how La Razelle entered my life. La Razelle was a French Southern restaurant on King Street in a converted carriage house with arched windows, antique mirrors, a courtyard fountain, and a private dining room upstairs that looked like it belonged in an oil painting. For 15 years, it had been one of Charleston's most admired restaurants. Then came debt, mismanagement, staff turnover, and an owner who believed reputation could substitute for payroll. It could not. Maribel Cruz, the same chef who had accepted my lemon zest suggestion at my wedding tasting, became executive chef there in 2021. She called me on February 14, 2023, at 9:38 in the evening. I remember the time because I was washing 2 wine glasses after a Valentine's dinner Graham had left early to take a call from his mother. Maribel said, "Allison, I need advice." Or a miracle. I leaned against the counter. Start with advice. She told me La Razelle was behind on vendor payments, losing staff, and at risk of being sold to a restaurant group that would likely gut the kitchen, keep the name, and turn the menu into tourist theater. The owner wanted out. The staff wanted stability. The bank wanted numbers that made sense. I asked her to send financials. She said they're ugly. I didn't ask if they were pretty. The first review took me 6 hours. The second took 12. The third involved my accountant, my attorney, and a hospitality financing partner named Julian Pierce. By March 10th, I understood the problem. La Razelle did not need to die. It needed discipline. Debt restructure, vendor repayment plan, private dining overhaul, menu tightening, better inventory controls, honest leadership, protection for the staff. It needed someone who respected the soul of the restaurant without being hypnotized by its chandeliers. I created a holding company called Blue Lantern Hospitality. Graham knew the name. He did not ask many questions. When I told him I was looking at a restaurant acquisition, he said, "Is that wise? Restaurants are risky." I said, "So are old houses, but your family calls that legacy." He frowned. "I'm just saying, don't overextend yourself trying to prove something." That sentence told me more than he intended. I asked, "Prove something to whom?" He loosened his tie. "No one. Forget I said it." I did not forget. On May 22, 2023, Blue Lantern Hospitality purchased 70% of La Razelle. Maribel retained a profit interest and full culinary control. Julian structured the financing. The staff received retention bonuses. Vendors received partial payment immediately and signed revised terms. We closed on a Monday morning at 10:15 in a conference room that smelled like coffee and printer toner. "I wore a charcoal suit," Maribel cried. I did not. Not because I didn't feel it. Because I knew the work had just begun. For 4 months, I spent my mornings on Porter Table and my afternoons at La Razelle. I learned the names of every line cook, server, bartender, dishwasher, prep assistant, and host. I replaced the reservation system. I renegotiated the linen contract. I fixed a drainage issue in the courtyard that had annoyed the staff for 3 years. I approved new chairs for the private dining room because the old ones looked elegant but punished spines. I did not announce ownership publicly. Not because I was hiding. Because restaurants function best when ego stays out of the kitchen. The staff knew. The bank knew. The vendors knew. My attorney knew. Graham knew in theory, though he treated it as another one of my projects. Vivienne did not know, because Vivienne did not ask questions unless she already preferred the answer. In August, La Razelle reopened after a 2-week refresh. Reviews were strong. Revenue stabilized. Staff turnover slowed. Private dining inquiries increased by 42%. We hosted a visiting food writer from Atlanta who described the restaurant as newly awake without losing its memory. I printed that line and taped it inside the office door. The first time Vivienne mentioned La Razelle after I bought it was during Labor Day weekend brunch at her house. She was discussing her upcoming wedding anniversary dinner, 45 years of marriage to Edward, which she described as, quote, a testament to standards. Charlotte suggested the country club. Vivienne sighed. Predictable. Graham suggested a private dinner at home. Vivienne looked at him as if he had offered paper plates. Then she said, perhaps La Razelle, though I hear it went through some instability. Restaurants do become common when they start chasing younger crowds. I was buttering a biscuit. I said La Razelle has improved recently. Vivienne gave me that smile. Have you catered there? No. Then how would you know? I placed the knife beside my plate. I follow the industry. Charlotte said, Allison follows menus like other people follow sports. She laughed. I counted. 1. Graham said nothing. That was becoming a language between us. His silence. My counting. In September, Vivienne booked the private dining room at La Razelle for December 9th, her anniversary celebration. 22 guests. Custom floral installation. 8-course menu. Rare wine pairings. Vintage champagne. Caviar service. Live violin for the first hour. A printed menu with the Mercer crest embossed at the top. When the event inquiry came through, my events director, Sophia Lane, called me from the restaurant office. Do you know a Vivienne Mercer? I looked up from a vendor contract. Yes. She is asking for the upstairs dining room and using the phrase, money is not the issue, in a way that suggests money will become the issue. I closed my eyes briefly. What date? December 9th. Take the booking, standard deposit, written terms, no verbal exceptions. Sophia paused. Do we tell her? No. Does she know you own the place? No. Another pause. Then Sophia said, understood. This will either be elegant or educational. It may be both. Vivienne signed the contract on September 12th. The estimate was initially $38,000. Then she began adding, Dame Perignon for arrival. A full caviar station because Charlotte said it looked European. White truffle supplement, a rare burgundy allocation we normally reserved for collectors. Custom sugar flowers on the dessert course. Hand-painted place cards. A private photographer. Additional staff. Parting gifts. Then, 2 weeks before the event, she requested an after-dinner tasting of 3 vintage ports for select guests only, which meant the people she wanted to impress after excluding the ones she considered decorative. By December 1st, the estimated bill was $126,000 before tax, gratuity, and service fees. Sophia emailed me the updated total. Subject: Your mother-in-law appears committed to fiscal violence. I stared at the number. Then I wrote back, ensure all charges are authorized in writing. Vivienne authorized everyone. The deposit card belonged to Edward's family office, but the final balance, per her request, would be presented at the dinner. She wrote in an email, please bring the check to me personally at the table. I prefer to handle these things visibly when family is present. That sentence made my hand still. Visibly. Family present. I knew then. Maybe not the exact shape of it, but enough. Vivienne was planning something. I showed the email to Graham that night at our kitchen table. He read it and rubbed his forehead. She likes ceremony. She wants the bill presented publicly. She's old-fashioned. She's strategic. He sighed. Allison, not everything is an attack. I looked at him. From your mother, most things are a rehearsal. He stood and carried his plate to the sink. I need this dinner to go well. It's their anniversary. Then speak to her. He turned. About what? About not using the restaurant staff, the bill, or me as theater. She doesn't even know you're involved. She will if she tries. His face tightened. What does that mean? It means I'm not protecting her from consequences if she creates them. He stared at me. Then he said, please don't make a scene. There it was, the family prayer. Not please don't let her hurt you. Not I'll stop her. Please don't make a scene. I said, "I won't make anything." And I meant it. Vivienne would make the scene. I would only refuse to clean it up. The week of the anniversary dinner, I prepared quietly. Not vindictively. Professionally. I met with Sophia, Mirabelle, and Matteo, our lead captain for private dining. Matteo was 32, from Miami, with the serene authority of a man who could manage drunk executives, anxious brides, and malfunctioning coffee service without raising his voice. He wore his dinner jacket like armor, and understood discretion as both art and weapon. I told them, "Mrs. Mercer may attempt to redirect the bill." Mirabelle folded her arms. "Redirect to whom?" "To me." Sophia's eyebrows rose. "At her own anniversary dinner?" "Yes." Matteo asked, "How would you like us to handle that?" "Professionally. No confrontation unless she creates confusion. If she presents the bill to me, clarify ownership account procedures." Calmly. Matteo nodded. "Understood." Mirabelle's mouth tightened. "She has treated you badly?" I looked at the prep list on the desk. "For years." Mirabelle said, "Then we will be very professional." The way she said professional made Sophia look down and hide a smile. On December 9th, I woke at 6:30. The morning was cold and bright. I walked for 40 minutes along the Battery, the harbor wind sharp against my face. I thought about calling my mother, but I knew she would worry. Elaine Porter had never trusted families who used silver as a personality. At 10:20, she called me instead. "Are you going tonight?" "Yes." "The anniversary thing?" "Yes." "Is she still mean in pearls?" I smiled. "Usually." My mother was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Remember, baby, a table can only shame you if you still want the seat." I stopped walking. That sentence stayed with me all day. At 4, I dressed in a black velvet dress, with long sleeves and a simple square neckline. I wore my mother's pearl studs, not the diamond earrings Vivienne had given me 2 Christmases earlier, with the comment, "These are more appropriate for your new circles." I pinned my hair low at the nape of my neck and put on red lipstick because my mother once told me every woman deserves one thing on her face that says she is not apologizing. Graham appeared in the bedroom doorway at 5:15 wearing a tuxedo. "You look beautiful." "Thank you." He shifted. "Can we just get through tonight?" I turned from the mirror. "That depends on your mother." He looked tired. "Allison." "No," I said. "Listen carefully. If she is gracious, I will be gracious. If she is rude, I will be calm. If she humiliates me publicly, I will answer publicly." He swallowed. "She's my mother." "And I'm your wife." The room held that sentence. He looked away first. We arrived at La Razelle at 6:52. The carriage house glowed against the winter dark. Gas lanterns flickered by the entrance. Inside, the host stand was polished, the mirrors shone, and the air carried the scent of browned butter, citrus, and rosemary. Sophia greeted guests at the foot of the stairs, elegant in a black suit. "Good evening, Mr. and Mrs. Mercer," she said to Graham and me. Vivienne was already upstairs. Of course. The private dining room had been transformed exactly according to her instructions. White roses, taper candles, crystal glassware, linen napkins folded into precise rectangles, menus embossed with the Mercer crest. A violinist played near the balcony doors. The lighting was soft enough to flatter people who had paid for good dermatology. Vivienne stood near the head of the table receiving guests. She wore cream silk and diamonds. Edward stood beside her, pleasant and distant, as he often did. He had always been kind to me in the way passive people are kind when kindness costs them nothing. He asked about my work sometimes, but never in front of Vivienne. Charlotte arrived in a silver dress and kissed the air beside my cheek. "Allison, how festive." "Did you help with the menu?" Vivienne turned before I could answer. "I let the restaurant handle it. One must trust specialists occasionally." I smiled. "Occasionally?" Vivienne's eyes sharpened, but guests were near, so she let it pass. Dinner began at 7:15. It was flawless. Mirabelle's kitchen sent out oyster stew with preserved lemon oil, butter poached lobster, duck with sour cherry glaze, beef tenderloin with truffle jus, and a dessert of satsuma soufflé with bourbon crème anglaise. Every plate landed at the same angle. Every wine was poured at the right temperature. Mateo moved through the room like a quiet conductor. Vivienne accepted compliments as though she had personally reduced every sauce. At the fourth course, Mrs. Ellery Bancroft, a museum board member with a voice like linen tearing, said, "Vivienne, this is divine. How did you ever secure the room?" Vivienne smiled. "One simply knows where to ask." I took a sip of water. Graham's hand tightened around his fork. At 7:58, Charlotte began telling a story about a dinner party I had hosted during my first year of marriage, where the soufflé fell before dessert. "It was adorable," she said. "Allison looked like someone had died." Vivienne laughed softly. "Well, for people in food, those things matter enormously." Charlotte added, "That was before she became more polished." 3 people laughed. I counted. 1, 2, 3. Graham leaned toward me and whispered, "Let it go." I turned my head slightly. "What exactly are you holding?" He said nothing. At 8:21, Edward gave a toast. It was brief and sweet. He thanked Vivienne for 45 years, said she had made life beautiful, and seemed for one moment genuinely moved. I watched Vivienne's face soften. There was a person somewhere under all that armor. I had seen glimpses before. They never lasted long enough to change anything. Then Vivienne stood. She thanked everyone for coming. She thanked Edward. She thanked Charleston, essentially. Then her gaze moved to me. "I also want to say how meaningful it is to have family here," she said. Family changes over time. It expands. It adjusts. Sometimes it welcomes people from very different backgrounds, and we all learn to be generous. The room made that polite hum people use when they sense danger but want dessert. Vivienne continued, "Allison has certainly brought a kind of energy to our family. A working spirit." Charlotte smiled into her glass. My face remained still. "She has reminded us," Vivienne said, "that ambition can come from many places. Even modest beginnings." Graham whispered, "Mom." Vivienne looked at him as if surprised. "What? I'm complimenting her." I folded my napkin once in my lap. She lifted her champagne. To family, to standards, and to knowing one's place well enough to rise from it. Glasses lifted. "Mine did not," Vivienne noticed. Of course she did. At 8:40, coffee was served. At 8:46, Mateo entered with the black leather check presenter. I watched Vivienne watch him. Her body changed slightly. Not enough for others to see. Enough for me. She held out her hand. "Mateo, here." He paused for one fraction of a second, then placed it in her hand. She opened it. The final total was $150,312.80. Authorized. Itemized. Accurate. Vivienne looked at the number with satisfaction, not shock. Then she stood. "Before we end the evening, I want to make one final gesture." Graham closed his eyes. I looked at him. So he knew. Not exactly. But enough. Vivienne walked around the table slowly, carrying the check presenter like a ceremonial object. Guests watched, confused and entertained. People love drama more than they admit, especially when they believe it will happen to someone else. She stopped beside my chair. "Allison," she said, "since you have spent years telling us how much you understand restaurants, hospitality, labor, and all the practical little details, I thought tonight might be a lovely opportunity for you to demonstrate." Then she dropped the bill into my lap, not handed. Dropped. The leather cover struck my dress and slid slightly toward my knees. A small sound escaped someone near the end of the table. Vivienne smiled. "Since Allison loves pretending she belongs in sophisticated rooms now, perhaps she can pay for one." Charlotte laughed. I counted. 1. Vivienne tilted her head. "Don't worry, sweetheart. I'm sure your little catering hobby prepared you for restaurant math." The room held its breath. Edward said quietly, "Vivienne." She lifted one hand. No, Allison is very capable. She reminds us often." I looked at Graham. He whispered, "Just let her have this, please." That was the final betrayal. Not the bill, not the smirk, not the insult, the please. He was still asking me to preserve the woman humiliating me, because preserving her was easier than standing beside me. I picked up the bill. I opened it. I read the total. Then I closed it carefully, folded the leather cover once in my hands, and placed it beside my water glass. I looked at Vivienne. "You're sure this is what you want to do?" Her smile brightened. "Oh, Allison, don't be sensitive. It's only dinner." I nodded once. Mateo stepped forward. His voice was calm. "Mrs. Mercer, would you like me to transfer this to the owner's account as usual?" Vivienne froze. Charlotte blinked. Graham stopped breathing beside me. I said nothing. Mateo continued. "For clarity, ma'am, I'm referring to Mrs. Allison Mercer. She owns La Razelle." The silence was immediate, not quiet, silent. The violinist had stopped playing 20 minutes earlier, but for some reason the absence of music suddenly felt visible. Vivienne looked at Mateo as if he had spoken another language. "I beg your pardon." Mateo remained perfectly composed. "Mrs. Allison Mercer is the majority owner of La Razelle through Blue Lantern Hospitality. Her office normally reviews owner account transfers personally, but because this is a family event, we waited for her instruction." Vivienne turned toward me. Her face had lost its color in elegant stages. "No?" "Just that, no." I picked up my water glass and took a slow sip. Then I said, "Yes." Charlotte laughed once, uncertainly. I counted. 1. She said, "This is a joke." Maribel appeared at the doorway then. Not planned. At least, not by me. She had heard enough from the service corridor. She stepped into the room, in her chef's coat, calm, and unmistakably in command. "It is not a joke," she said. "Mrs. Mercer saved this restaurant." Several guests turned. Maribel continued. "She purchased the controlling interest in May, restructured the debt, paid the vendors, retained the staff, and gave the kitchen room to do the work you praised all evening." Vivienne stared at her. "You work for her?" Maribel's expression did not change. "I work with her." That correction landed beautifully. Sophia entered behind Maribel with a folder in her hands. She looked at me. I gave the smallest nod. Sophia placed the folder on the table beside the bill. "Mrs. Mercer, I also have the signed event authorizations if clarification is needed. Every enhancement was approved in writing by Mrs. Vivienne Mercer, including the rare burgundy, the caviar service, the custom florals, the port tasting, and the request that the final check be presented publicly." The word "publicly" moved through the room like smoke. Mrs. Ellery Bancroft slowly lowered her coffee cup. Edward stared at his wife. "Vivienne," he said, "you asked for the check to be presented publicly?" Vivienne opened her mouth, closed it, opened it again. "I wanted to acknowledge the cost of excellence." I looked at her. "No, you wanted to put the cost in my lap." Her eyes flashed, grateful for anger she could use. But I did not give her anger. I gave her facts. "You signed the contract on September 12th. You increased the estimate 8 times. You declined the standard prepayment option because you wanted the balance presented at the table. You wrote that you preferred to handle these things visibly when family was present." Sophia opened the folder and placed the printed email in front of Edward. Edward read it. His face hardened in a way I had never seen before. Charlotte whispered, "Mother." Vivienne snapped, "Do not take that tone with me." There she was. Not the hostess, not the patron, the woman under the cream silk. I looked at Graham. He was staring at the table. I said, "Did you know?" His jaw tightened. "Allison, did you know she planned to hand me the bill?" He swallowed. "I knew she wanted to make a point." The room seemed to tilt. A point. $150,000 of humiliation reduced to a point. I nodded slowly. "What point?" He looked at me then, and I saw the truth before he said anything. He did not want to answer because the answer would indict him. Vivienne answered for him. "That you have become arrogant," she said. "That you needed reminding that money and taste are not the same thing." I almost smiled. "Vivienne, you tried to use my restaurant to teach me I didn't belong in it." No one moved. Then Edward said quietly, "Allison, how long have you owned La Razelle?" "Since May 22nd. He closed his eyes. "You didn't tell us." "I told Graham I purchased a restaurant group asset. No one else asked." Mrs. Bancroft said, not unkindly, "Vivienne, this is rather extraordinary." Vivienne turned sharply. "Ellery, please." But Ellery Bancroft had survived 3 board chairwomen and 2 husbands. She was not afraid of cream silk. She said, "No, I mean it is extraordinary that you attempted to embarrass the owner of the restaurant with the restaurant's own invoice." Someone at the far end coughed. This time, it was laughter being strangled. I counted. 1, 2, 3. Vivienne heard it. That was when her face truly changed. Not at ownership, not at the bill, at laughter moving away from her control. She looked at me. "You set me up." "No," I said. "You booked the room. You ordered the menu. You requested the bill. You carried it across the room. You dropped it in my lap. I simply owned the table you chose." Maribel looked down. Sophia bit the inside of her cheek. Mateo remained serene enough to be carved from marble. Graham whispered, "Allison, can we step outside?" I said no. His eyes widened slightly. "I think we should talk." "We will, but not before your mother pays attention." Vivienne said, "I will not be spoken to like some delinquent customer." I tilted my head. "Then stop acting like one." The room inhaled. Vivienne's hand trembled once at her side, small, almost invisible. But I saw it. She said, "Edward, we are leaving." Edward did not stand. That was the second silence of the evening. The first had belonged to me. This one belonged to him. He looked at the bill, then at his wife. "No." Vivienne stared. "What did you say?" He removed his glasses slowly. "I said no. We are not leaving until you apologize to Allison and settle the bill." Vivienne's mouth opened. Edward continued, voice steady. "I allowed you to be sharp for years because I told myself sharp was your way. But tonight you tried to humiliate my son's wife in public with a bill you created for that purpose. And you did it in her own establishment." He looked tired, older, but finally present. "I am ashamed." Vivienne whispered, "Edward." He shook his head. "No, not tonight." Charlotte looked down at her lap. Graham looked at his father, as if he had just witnessed a foreign language become possible. Edward turned to me. "Allison, I am sorry I did not say this sooner." That apology did not repair 6 years, but it marked the first time a Mercer man had said the true thing. While Vivienne was still in the room, I accepted it with a nod. Vivienne remained standing. Her face was pale, except for 2 high spots of color on her cheeks. Finally, she said, "I apologize if you felt embarrassed." "There are apologies built like locked gates." I looked at her. "No." She blinked. "No? That is not an apology." Her eyes narrowed. The room was still watching. I said, "Try again. Or don't. But don't insult both of us by calling that one." For a moment, I thought she would walk out. Part of me hoped she would. Then Edward said, "Vivienne." She swallowed. Her voice was lower when she spoke again. "I apologize for embarrassing you." I waited. Her jaw tightened. "In public." I waited. Her fingers curled around the back of her chair. "And for using the bill to do it." I said, "Thank you." Not warmly, not cruelly, just accurately. Then I looked at Mateo. "Please charge the event according to the signed agreement. The Mercer family office card on file may be used for the balance, unless Mrs. Mercer prefers another method." Mateo nodded. "Of course, Mrs. Mercer." Vivienne flinched at the title, not because it was hers, because it was mine, too. The dinner ended without the port tasting. That saved Edward $8,400. At 9:24, guests began leaving in careful clusters, the way people exit a room where someone else's family history has spilled onto the rug. Mrs. Bancroft stopped beside me and said, "The duck was excellent." I smiled. "I'll tell Chef Cruz." She glanced at Vivienne, then back at me. "And the service was unforgettable." I said, "We aim for that." She smiled and left. Charlotte avoided me until the last possible moment. Then she approached near the staircase, silver dress catching the light. "Allison," she said, "I didn't know." I looked at her. "You knew enough to laugh." She flushed. "I'm sorry." I studied her face. Charlotte had spent years orbiting her mother's approval like it was oxygen. That did not excuse her. It explained the shape of the weakness. I said, "I hope you mean that when there isn't an audience." She nodded, eyes wet. I did not comfort her. Comfort is not owed to people grieving the loss of permission to mistreat you. Graham and I left at 10:06. We walked down King Street in silence toward the car. The air was cold. The sidewalks were crowded with couples, tourists, college students, and families, taking holiday photos under strings of white lights. Charleston looked beautiful, in the indifferent way cities do when your life is cracked open. Inside the car, Graham sat with both hands on the steering wheel. He said, "You should have told me you owned it like that." I turned toward him. "I did." "You said you acquired a controlling interest in a distressed hospitality asset." "Yes." "That's not the same as saying my mother's anniversary dinner is at your restaurant." "Would that have changed what you did?" He said nothing. I nodded. "There it is." He exhaled. "Allison, tonight was humiliating for everyone." "No, it was revealing for everyone. Humiliation was your mother's plan." He looked out the windshield. "I didn't think she would actually hand you the bill. But you knew she wanted to make a point." His knuckles whitened. "I thought if you just let it pass, we could get through the night." I laughed once. Softly, not because anything was funny, because the math was suddenly simple. "You wanted me to be humiliated efficiently." He looked at me then. "That's not fair." "No, Graham, that is finally fair." We drove home without speaking. The next morning, I woke at 6:15 and made coffee. Graham was not in bed. I found him in the kitchen, still wearing his undershirt and pajama pants, staring at a text from his mother. He looked up. "She says you destroyed her anniversary." I poured coffee into my mug. "No, she catered her anniversary around an ambush and didn't like the menu." He closed his eyes. "Allison." I set the mug down. "I need to ask you something, and I need the truth. Did you tell her I had become arrogant?" He did not answer quickly enough. That was an answer. "When?" He rubbed his face. "A few weeks ago, we argued after you showed me the email. I said you had changed." I felt something inside me settle. Not break. Settle. Changed how? "You're harder." "No, I'm less available for disrespect." He leaned against the counter. "I didn't mean for her to use it like that." "But you gave it to her." He looked miserable. For years, that would have moved me toward him. I would have softened, clarified, forgiven before apology, made a bridge out of my own back. Not that morning. I said, "I'm going to stay at the Wentworth for a few days." His head lifted. "What?" "I need space." "From me?" "Yes." He looked genuinely shocked, which told me he still thought the worst thing that had happened was his mother's exposure, not his participation. I packed calmly. 3 dresses. 2 pairs of flats. A laptop. My mother's pearls. The folder Sophia had given me with the event authorizations. Graham stood in the bedroom doorway. "Are you leaving me?" I zipped the bag. "I'm leaving the room where your silence keeps becoming my problem." He swallowed. "I don't know how to stand up to her." I looked at him. "I know." His face fell. "That's it?" "No, that's the tragedy." I checked into the Wentworth at noon. My suite overlooked a courtyard with winter camellias and a small fountain. I placed my bag on a luggage rack, sat at the desk, and opened my laptop. There were emails from Sophia, Maribel, Julian, and our accountant. Razelle's anniversary dinner had already become Charleston gossip by breakfast. Not because of me. Because several guests had apparently found the story too exquisite to keep private. By Monday afternoon, I received 3 new private dining inquiries. One included the sentence, "We heard your staff handles difficult rooms beautifully." I forwarded that one to Mateo with the note, "You are now a legend." He replied, "As usual, I deny everything politely." I smiled for the first time that day. Vivienne did not contact me for 9 days. Edward did. He called on December 12th at 4:10. "Allison, it's Edward." "Hello, Edward. I wanted you to know the bill was paid." I saw. And I wanted to apologize again. I leaned back in the hotel desk chair. "Thank you." He cleared his throat. "I should have intervened years ago. I confused peace with letting Vivienne have her way. That seems to be a family pattern." He was quiet. Then he said yes. One word. "But honest," he added. "Graham is struggling." "I know. I'm not calling to ask you to fix that. I waited. He continued. I'm calling to say he needs to decide whether he is a husband or a son first when those roles conflict. I wish someone had said that to me earlier. I looked out at the courtyard fountain. Maybe you can say it to him now. I intend to. Graham came to the hotel on December 14th. He texted from the lobby at 5:36. May I come up? I stared at the message for a full minute. Then I replied, yes. He arrived carrying no flowers. Good. Flowers would have offended me. He sat in the chair across from the sofa and looked exhausted. I spoke to my father, he said. I'm glad. And my mother. I waited. She thinks I'm being manipulated. By me? By reality, I think. Despite myself, I almost smiled. He looked down at his hands. I failed you. I did not rescue him from the sentence. He took a breath. I failed you at brunch, at our engagement dinner, at Thanksgiving, at the wedding tasting, at the anniversary dinner. I kept asking you to let things go because I was too afraid to pick them up. My throat tightened. A little, not enough to speak. He continued. When she handed you the bill, I wanted the floor to open, not because she hurt you, because I knew I had let her reach that moment. I looked at him. That distinction matters. I know. Does it? He nodded slowly. It does now. I studied his face. I loved Graham. That made everything more complicated, not less. Love does not erase cowardice. Cowardice does not always erase love. Marriage lives in the terrible space where both can be true and still not be enough. He said, I called Dr. Feldman. Our old marriage counselor? Yes. I made an appointment for myself first. That surprised me. He saw it. I need to understand why her disappointment scares me more than your pain. I looked down. That was the first useful sentence he had said in years. Not perfect. Useful. I said, I'm not coming home yet. He nodded. I know. I don't know when I will. I know. I don't know if ownership of Razelle is the only thing your family needs to learn about me. His eyes lifted. What does that mean? It means there are parts of myself I stopped showing, because your family taught me every fact would become ammunition. I won't live like that again. He said, I don't want you to. I believed that he wanted to mean it. That is not the same as trusting it. Vivienne finally sent a note on December 18th. Not a text. Not an email. A handwritten note on thick cream paper, with her initials at the top. Allison. I have rewritten this several times, because each version either sounded defensive or insufficient. Perhaps this one will be both. I was cruel at dinner. I intended to embarrass you. I told myself I was correcting arrogance, but the truth is I was punishing you for becoming someone I could not place beneath me. I have not known what to do with you since Graham brought you home because you did not need the things I knew how to give. That made me feel useless and, worse, ordinary. None of that excuses what I did. I am sorry. Vivienne. I read it twice, then I placed it in a drawer, not because it healed me, because it was evidence of something different. Maybe not change, but a crack. The holidays passed quietly. I spent Christmas morning with my mother in Savannah. We made cinnamon rolls, drank coffee, and watched a movie neither of us followed. She asked about Graham once. I said, he's trying. She said, trying is nice. Changing is quieter. My mother had a gift for folding knives into napkins. In January, I returned home, but not to the marriage as it had been. Graham and I began counseling. Separately first, then together. His work was learning that avoiding conflict with Vivienne was not kindness. Mine was learning that explaining pain to someone unwilling to protect it had become its own form of self-abandonment. Vivienne was not invited to our house for 3 months. When she finally came in April, she brought lemon cake from a bakery instead of a comment about mine. She stood in my kitchen and said, "This is a lovely room." I said, "Thank you." She did not add guidance. Progress can be as small as an insult withheld. At La Razelle, business grew, not because of scandal, though I won't pretend the story hurt us. People came for the food, and stayed, because the staff made them feel cared for without making them feel managed. Maribel's menu received a regional award in May. Mateo was promoted to Director of Service. Sophia built private dining into the most profitable part of the restaurant without losing its grace. On the anniversary of the dinner, I hosted a staff meal upstairs in the private room. No guests, no embossed crests, just the people who made the restaurant live. We served fried chicken, collard greens, potato gratin, salad, and Maribel's chocolate chess pie. We pushed tables together and ate family style while rain tapped the windows. Mateo raised a glass of sparkling water. "To owner account transfers," he said. Everyone laughed. I counted, not because I needed to measure cruelty, because this time the laughter included me. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I thought then about the bill on my lap, the weight of it, the heat in my face that I refused to show, Graham's whisper, Vivian's smile, the way the room had shifted when Mateo said owner. People love stories where the underestimated woman owns the restaurant, the bank, the company, the house, the truth. But ownership is not the real revenge. The real revenge is not needing their recognition to make your life real. La Razelle had been mine before Vivienne knew. My work had been real before Graham defended it. My mother's kitchen had taught me more about dignity than Vivienne's dining room ever could. And I had belonged in sophisticated rooms long before anyone with a family crest decided whether to make space. That is the part 1. Want you to hear if you were sitting somewhere right now, replaying a moment when someone tried to make you feel small in public. A table is just furniture. A bill is just paper. A family name is just sound, unless the people carrying it have character. Do not let someone's performance of superiority convince you that your quiet work has no weight. Let them smirk. Let them underestimate the woman who knows the margins, the staff, the contracts, the vendors, the kitchen, the payroll, and the room. Let them make their dramatic little gesture. Then let the waiter say your name correctly. I did not ruin Vivienne's anniversary. Her contempt did that. I did not embarrass the Mercer family. Their silence did that. I did not weaponize the restaurant. I simply refused to pretend I was a guest in something I had built. There is a difference. Graham and I are still married as I tell this. I say that plainly, because not every story ends with divorce papers or forgiveness wrapped in a bow. Some marriages end. Some continue differently. Some survive only after the person who stayed quiet finally tells the truth and means it. I no longer attend Mercer family events where Graham has not already made boundaries clear. Vivienne no longer comments on my background, my work, my clothes, or my mother's recipes. Once, at a luncheon, someone asked how La Razelle had recovered so beautifully. Vivienne looked at me, then she said, "Allison did that." 4 words, no flourish, no apology attached. I accepted them for what they were, late, small, true. And sometimes truth, even late and small, deserves to be noticed without being mistaken for enough. If there is one thing I learned, it is that people who believe they own the room often forget to check who owns the building. They trust old names, old habits, old silence. They mistake kindness for uncertainty and restraint for lack of power. That is their mistake. You do not have to correct it immediately. Sometimes you can let them order the champagne. Let them add the caviar. Let them request the rare burgundy. Let them tell the staff to bring the check to the table. Let them walk across the room with that perfect little smile. And then, when they drop the bill in your lap, you can lift your eyes and allow the truth to introduce you. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just waited for Mateo to ask whether I wanted it transferred to the owner's account. Thank you for staying with this story until the end. If you have ever been treated like you were lucky to be included in a room you quietly helped build, I hope Allison's story reminded you that dignity does not need permission from people who confuse cruelty with class. Revenge Chronicles is for women who keep their composure, do the work, and let the truth arrive at exactly the right table. Follow for more stories where silence is strategy, grace is strength, and the comeback is served with perfect timing. Now tell me in the comments, if your mother-in-law dropped a $150,000 bill in your lap to humiliate you, would you reveal you owned the restaurant right there?